Let's talk for a minute, guys. Let's talk about God. No, we're not going to get into a religious debate. Autotheism. The elevation of perhaps a mortal or an idea to godlike status. Not only is this an interesting concept, it also happens to be the title of the new Faceless album released here in 2012. And whenever you think about the Faceless, you have an expectation that was given to you by their first album and the latter album that we just heard a couple of years ago entitled Planetary Duality. Now in that time frame, a lot has happened. And I actually have to speak to this with a sports metaphor, as weird as that sounds. So we're going from God to sports. Sports of which, by some, is potentially an autotheism in itself, because many people elevate these individuals and these athletes to godlike status. Consider this. Consider there is a young core team, perhaps a Major League Baseball team here in America, or a young soccer club abroad. A young core team that is able to do very well for themselves, not to mention get elevated to this status by the fan base that surrounds them. Now imagine what would happen if many of those original members, that original youth movement, were to pursue other interests, whether it be by their own accord or because the salary cap doesn't allow the team to keep them on. Imagine as a baseball team you're trying to build a club around a Barry Bonds or an Andrew McCutchen or an Albert Pujols, or if we're talking a soccer club, you're building it around Thierry Henry or Ronaldo with new faces, and see what happens. The Faceless is going through that. The Faceless added a new vocalist, not to mention also a new primary axe slinger for this album. And Autotheist is definitely auditory evidence of this change. There are many things that are different from about this band that can be told and seen and heard on this album. The first thing that everyone is going to perhaps throw their arms up in protest about is the evolution of clean singing in the Faceless's music. However, I myself find this to be an absolute welcome idea. The reason why is because while it was present before, it has now taken a heightened importance. And this actually causes musical dynamisty. It actually causes a band to become a lot better because you are able to do a lot more with it. Now this is the first album where we're seeing it in this rigorous amount. So maybe if you're not completely and totally satisfied with the result this time around, one of two explanations should be used. One, you simply expect death vocals at all times, and probably should reconsider that notion. Or secondly, the best is still yet to come. It's really hard for me to find a three-part movement, or a multi-part movement in a song, that can top the very first three tracks on this album, which is the Autotheist movements. Really, this is just an absolute mammoth display of tremendous song structure, dueling guitars, clean and death vocals that are done exquisitely well, tonal change, complete time signature shift, not to mention just an overall flow of atmosphere that could only be described in this year of our Lord 2012 as truly and encapsulatingly epic. This is a three-part movement this year in 2012 that reminds me a lot of last year's Sanhedrin release. Now, if you guys don't know who Sanhedrin is, I know it sucks. It really sucks that more people do not know about that band. I did a review on their EP. I really think this is a band that needs to be signed and be huge, because they did a two-part EP, actually three-part. I apologize because there is that tiny part at the end that is very, very similar in stature to this. It is very, very similar in stature with the frequent time signature changes, also with the dueling guitars, the progressive death metal bliss and beauty that there is. And now the Faceless has countered with their own, though it's not really a counter, considering right now the Faceless, as compared to Sanhedrin, is the heavyweight, whereas Sanhedrin would be the up-and-comer, the one that may one day vie for the crown. Now the remainder of this 9-track, 40-minute long endeavor falls a little flat. Now, I'm not saying it's bad by any means, but I'm saying that as compared to the first 3 tracks that you're hit with, bing, bam, boom, right whenever this album kicks off, it just does not seem to have the same potency, the same effect that was felt on the first 3 tracks. Those 3 movements, that trinity, that triad, that triforce of greatness, just doesn't seem to have the same magnificence. You're not as floored with these tracks as you are with the first 3, even though they do tend to flow, until you reach the end. This is an album that exquisitely demonstrates the positive power of 2 very splendid bookends. And by that I mean that the first 3 tracks, that first movement, 18 minutes out of 3 tracks, that just blows you away, and the final track, 6.5 minutes of In Solitude, just really, really bend your mind, really show an exquisite taste, a very, very promising future, and overall, just dresses to impress. Influences are also something that are shifting slightly for the Faceless. You can hear a lot of Opeth and Cynic in this, and the combination of those two with the already technical precision that the Faceless is able to provide already, previous to this album even being concocted, spawned, or even dreamed of, makes that trinity, that triad, that triforce of musical stylings a tremendous thought to behold, and that thought has now become a fierce reality. Now overall, this album is not going to quite live up to the 10 out of 10 that we experienced earlier this year. However, I bring a message of supreme hope. I bring a message of supreme positivity. I really liked what I heard on this album. I felt that there were so many stepping stones that this band was able to cross in the few-year period it took between Planetary Duality and this album, AUTOTHEISM, to cause this band to grow not only as individuals, but to grow musically, to become even tighter, to become a band that has even more of a musical pot to draw their inspiration from in order to concoct and create just fantastic, technical, progressive death metal. Another triad, another trinity, another triforce, right there in the genre classification. 9 out of 10. And believe me, there were moments in time where I felt that a 9 would be just a little bit too light and not really truly accurate. However, after taking it all in, after really focusing myself on the music and on my feelings, I really feel that this album does lack a little something in the middle. However, if they wrote a complete record, if they wrote a complete conceptual release, quite similarly to that which they did on the very first 3 tracks, imagine that for a full 45 to 50 minutes. The concept just blows your mind. The thought just absolutely makes you beg on your knees and plead that it occurs. But if they did that, it could be a supreme danger to easily eclipse anything that would come out in that calendar year. They didn't do it this year, but they are also a club that has a lot of youth. Also a team, a band that is experimenting with a new lineup. One that sounds like it should be a lineup to stay, because goddamn are the results impressive. Now those of you that are going to complain about the petty natures, that are going to complain about the added influences of bands like Opeth and Cynic, the added clean vocals, the fact that that is being done in a more gregarious fashion, as opposed to it just being done every so often, I think some of you are missing the point. Metal is not all about rehashing the same idea that you've done on the last 2 albums, kind of saying that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It is about taking some risks. It's about experimentation. It's about being universal. This is a band that's embracing that idea. And I have a feeling that this is an idea that is going to be sticking around for a large portion of the next part of their career. So I would suggest re-listening, retaking it in, and embracing. Fantastic release. Whenever this comes out on the 14th of August, everybody in America, if you're a metal fan, you should be at your local record store picking this one up. That is a fact.